On the Russian steppe in the spring of 1942, a T-34 pushed forward through the morning mist, less than 1,000 yards from the German lines. For months, these 30-ton machines seemed untouchable. German shells ricocheted off their armor. Panzer IIIs, the Wehrmacht's so-called tank killers, couldn't scratch them. Entire divisions had learned to steer clear. But this morning, a German escort vehicle, long dismissed as obsolete, lay in wait. Its gun had been newly upgraded with a round designed for an impossible task. Through his sights, the gunner tracked the tank as it lumbered closer. He fired. The shot screamed across the field and punched through the Soviet armor, just between the scars of 2 earlier glancing hits. Soviet infantry froze. Smoke drifted from the wreck. The Germans' forgotten Panzer IV had just pierced the unpierceable, the opening move in an escalating clash of armor and firepower. In 1916, in the muddy hellscape of the Somme in northern France, the Allies unleashed a new weapon that would change battlefields forever: the tank. Though these early models were crude and lumbering, they could crush barbed wire, shrug off rifle fire, and roll straight over the very same trenches that stopped armies for years. By war's end, French tanks had also joined the fight, leading assaults so fast that infantry struggled to keep pace. Germany managed only a handful of its own before the guns fell silent, but the lesson was obvious. Armor could decide the next war. The Allies weren't about to give Germany that chance. The Treaty of Versailles, signed under threat of renewed war on June 28, 1919, stripped Germany of the right to build, own, or even study armored vehicles. Yet design work never truly stopped, and plans were drawn in secret. Experiments ran under civilian covers, and German engineers tested prototypes at remote sites in the Soviet Union. In 1934, now firmly in power, Adolf Hitler began rebuilding the Reich's war machine, placing the tank at its core. Alongside him, military thinkers like Heinz Guderian championed a new style of warfare built around fast, coordinated armored thrusts, with columns of tanks mass-produced in factories all over the nation. Among these new Panzer machines, the German word for armor was the Panzer IV, designated initially as the heavier partner to the tank-hunting Panzer III. Rolling off the production line for the first time in 1937, the Panzer IV was a vehicle with a square hull, flat-sided turret, and 8 small road wheels per side, connected by leaf springs. Despite weighing over 18 tons, the type remained nimble enough to keep pace, thanks to its Maybach V12 engine, which propelled it to a maximum speed of 25 miles per hour on roads and a range of about 125 miles. Its protective armor was just enough to stop machine gun fire and shell fragments, while its short-barreled 75mm gun was meant to smash right through bunkers with a single high-explosive round. Earlier model tanks, even those made by the Allies, carried too few men inside, forcing the commander to split his focus between spotting threats, aiming, and loading. However, the Panzer III and IV broke that pattern with a dedicated 5-man crew, each one assigned to a single task, making the whole machine more responsive and much more effective in combat. The commander had another advantage: a raised cupola on the turret roof, giving him a full 360-degree view without leaving cover, bringing unparalleled battlefield awareness. Early in development, when the Panzer program was still secret, German engineers gave their prototypes harmless-sounding code names to throw off foreign intelligence. The Panzer IV was known as the Begleitwagen, escort vehicle, a title that matched its planned role as just a support tank rather than a frontline attacker. However, the fighting ahead would lead this Begleitwagen down an unexpected path. By the time Germany crossed into Poland on September 1, 1939, officially igniting World War II, the Wehrmacht had only 211 Panzer IVs ready for combat. In these opening weeks, these models supported divisions, breaking through border defenses and seizing key towns, teaching top brass 2 immediate lessons. First came the good news. The stubby 75mm gun could punch straight through Poland's thin-skinned 7-ton light tanks. But even the country's outdated 37mm Bofors guns, or older field pieces pressed into an anti-tank roll, were deadly against Germany's own thin armor. By the time Warsaw fell, only 5 weeks later, 19 Panzer IVs were destroyed beyond repair, while another 50 were waiting for repairs. With nearly a third of the Panzer IV force gone, the Wehrmacht needed more and better armored models fast. As the spring of 1940 rolled around, German factories had squeezed out nearly 300 more Panzer IV models for the upcoming invasion of France and the Low Countries. Despite being spread thin and unevenly across 10 divisions, the vehicle performed excellently for the first week of the campaign, making Belgian anti-tank positions disappear under its explosive shells and hitting British light tanks directly, leaving them burning as the support tank continued to clear the path for the far better armed Panzer IIIs. Against most Allied armor, the Panzer IV's short-barreled gun performed adequately, punching through light tanks and supporting infantry, but it was also already showing its limits. French Somme S-35 cavalry tanks, with their rounded armor, shrugged off direct hits, while other larger models simply refused to crack. But it was 1940, and the Wehrmacht was still fresh and ready to push on, no matter the odds. On May 16, 1940, near the village of Stonne, outside Sedan, a Panzer IV commander spotted a vehicle moving through his viewport. It was a French Char B1 heavy tank, with armor plating twice as thick as anything the Germans had, and also weighing nearly twice as much as the support vehicle, advancing through the morning haze. Reacting quickly, the German gunner lined up his shot and fired, only to see the shell strike the frontal armor and then bounce off, leaving barely a scorch mark. Not willing to give up against such a meaty prize, the commander ordered another round, then another and another. Through it all, the crew worked with clockwork-like precision, loading, aiming, and firing. By the time the rounds reached 20, the French tank's frontal armor remained unbreached. Finally, whether through luck or desperation, the German gunner aimed low, hitting the model's track assembly, shearing through the steel links and stopping it in its tracks. From one moment to the next, the French tank lurched to one side. But despite being immobilized, its turret was still moving, searching for targets. That's when a second B1 emerged from the smoke. Once again, the Panzer IV swiveled its turret, and this time, with luck on their side, the shell struck the French tank's cupola at just the right angle, jamming the commander's hatch and vision blocks. As the blinded and confused B1 began reversing, exposing its thinner rear plating in the process, the German vehicle's gunner fired one last time, and the shell punched through, bringing the heavy tank and the unlikely 2-to-1 duel to a grinding stop. However, for 6 weeks across France, Panzer IV crews faced uneven odds whenever French heavy armor appeared. By June, when France surrendered, the Wehrmacht had lost nearly 100 Panzer IVs. Through the winter of 1940, German engineers addressed the armor problem, delivering the Panzer IV version E with frontal armor doubled to 50 millimeters. Though far from revolutionary, it was enough to stop the next heavy tank at point-blank range. These upgraded tanks got their first test in the Balkans, when in April 1941, the 9th Panzer Division took 20 Panzer IVs deep into Yugoslavia. Near Kumanovo, they ran into defenders armed with checkmate anti-tank guns that knocked out 4 German tanks before Luftwaffe dive bombers saved the advance. A week later, in Greece, those same Panzer IVs met British cruiser tanks outside Athens, leaving 8 British tanks burning. By the end of the month, Yugoslavia and Greece had fallen, with the 9th Division losing only 6 Panzer IVs. After a year and a half of war, the Panzer strategy had proven itself against scattered resistance and outdated equipment. But that advantage was about to vanish. In just 6 weeks, German troops would cross into the Soviet Union, and waiting for them were over 20,000 tanks, including the new T-34s and heavy KB-1s, unlike anything the Wehrmacht had faced before. At dawn on June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. That morning, more than 3 million Axis troops surged across an 1,800-mile front line into the Soviet Union, supported by thousands of guns, aircraft, and tanks. Convinced the campaign would end as quickly as those before it, the German High Command expected the Red Army to collapse in weeks. For the Soviet crews, the first encounters with German armor were sudden and unforgettable. As villages burned and columns of dust marked the German advance, one Red Army tank man recalled seeing Panzer IVs breaking through, stating, quote, "We froze when we saw the ugly, monstrous tanks of bright yellow tiger color appearing from Sitno Gardens. They slowly rolled in our direction, sparking with tongues of shots. Soon enough, the Germans realized that while the Panzer IV had no trouble knocking out the lightly armored T-26s and BT series tanks that made up much of the Red Army's force, against the new Soviet designs, such as the now iconic T-34 medium tank and KB-1 heavy tank, its short-barreled gun was almost comically ineffective. Now, if the Wehrmacht wanted to keep pace with Soviet armor, they needed a new gun. However, this kind of firepower required more space than the Panzer III, the Army's original tank hunter, could offer. Since the Panzer IV had a wider turret ring and a larger turret, it became the only choice for the upgrade. With that decision, the Panzer IV, once built to follow in the Panzer III's shadow, was now headed for the front of the lines. Its new weapon was the 75mm KWK-40. Though the same caliber as the original short gun, it came with a much longer barrel that fired shells much faster, giving it a flatter trajectory, greater range, and far more penetrating power. The first of these long guns went into version F tanks, but the next production model, the version G, carried it straight from the factory, with 80mm of frontal armor, enough to match or exceed the protection of most Allied tanks, even the American Sherman. When the upgraded tanks reached the Soviet front in early 1942, the battlefield was already strewn with the wrecks of thousands of German vehicles, abandoned to the cold, to empty fuel tanks, and to Soviet guns. With spring's thaw, Hitler demanded yet another push, south to the Caucasus oil fields, and east to the city of Stalingrad. A total of 135 of the new long-gun Panzer IVs were dedicated to this ambitious thrust into southern Russia, spread thin across 9 entire Panzer divisions. In May 1942, a German division moving toward the Sea of Azov, the gateway to the Caucasus, fielded just 12 of the new long-barreled Panzer IVs. In their first battles, those tanks knocked out 50 Soviet vehicles, piercing T-34s, and even the heavy KV-1s. They weren't perfect. It often took 8 direct hits to set one ablaze, and shells jammed so badly the crews sometimes had to climb out under fire to clear them. Yet after their first triumphs, commanders pushed these tanks to the front of every attack. At last, the Germans had a weapon that could face the T-34 head-on. On August 11, 1942, 4 Panzer IVs rolled into the village of Yelnya in western Russia, their powerful engines drowning out the morning birds as they drove Soviet defenders from the rubble-strewn streets. Over the next 2 days, small teams of T-34s emerged from the tree line with infantry swarming behind them, only to burn under the Panzer IV's new guns. On the evening of the 13th, no fewer than 10 KV-1 heavy tanks advanced through the dusk. The German crews held their fire until the Soviet giants filled their sights at just 50 feet, then opened up, eliminating them. For days, the Soviets attacked again and again. During one assault, several T-34s veered off course in the smoke and confusion, plunging into a hidden swamp. From there, their trapped crews could only watch as German gunners destroyed them one by one. By week's end, 43 Soviet tanks lay wrecked on the approaches to the village, while the Germans had lost only 2 Panzer IVs. Yet, as another winter in Soviet Russia arrived, the German advance froze solid. Fuel tanks ran dry, reinforcements never came, and the infantry languished in the ruins of Stalingrad. When the Germans launched their desperate rescue attempt that December, their relief force could muster just 46 long-gun Panzer IVs between them. Machines that months earlier had been crushing Soviet armor now struggled just to reach the battlefield. When the operation failed and the survivors retreated westward through the snow, everything gained in the entirety of 1942 vanished into the Russian winter. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, other Panzer IVs were fighting a completely different war under the scorching North African sun. In May 1942, the first 9 long-gun Panzer IVs arrived in North Africa, their fresh desert camouflage paint still gleaming as they rolled off transport ships into the searing heat of the desert war. Rommel immediately threw them into battle at Gazala, where they faced their first test against British armor, proving to be devastatingly accurate in the open desert. The German crews discovered they could take down M3 Lee American medium tanks from over a mile away. The weapon came with one serious flaw, however. Its massive muzzle flash temporarily blinded the gunner with each shot, forcing crews to fire, then wait precious seconds for their vision to clear before engaging again. By July, after weeks of savage fighting, the German panzer regiments could barely scrape together 50 operational tanks between them, with just 2 Panzer IVs still running. Through the autumn of 1942, the odds turned against Germany, with Rommel down to a few hundred tanks against Montgomery's more than 1,000. As the year ended, only a dozen Panzer IVs remained functional in the entire theater. Germany rushed reinforcements across the Mediterranean, but Allied submarines and aircraft sent many to the bottom before they ever saw land. Even so, in February 1943, during Operation Frühlingswind, a sudden German counterattack near the Tunisian town of Sidi Bouzid aimed at smashing U.S. forces before they could fully entrench. The battered panzers showed they could still deliver a crushing blow. In just 48 hours, they destroyed nearly all the 53 Shermans of the American 1st Armored Division, and another 54 Allied tanks fell in the same brief span, totaling nearly 100 downed Allied tanks. This stunning victory, however, was not enough to undo the massive gains the Allies were showing. By mid-1943, with supply lines cut and nowhere left to run, the last German troops in Africa laid down their arms, and the surviving Panzer IVs, veterans of countless desert battles, became trophies for the victorious Allies. The Panzer IV Version H became the backbone of German armored divisions from 1943 until the end of the war. It carried unusual features born out of hard lessons at the front. Zimmerit, a paste spread over the armor in ridges to stop magnetic mines from adhering, and Schürzen, thin steel skirts that forced Soviet anti-tank rifle rounds to deflect harmlessly before reaching the main armor. Through the spring of 1943, Panzer IVs helped blunt Soviet offensives around Kharkov, their long guns claiming nearly 200 T-34s in March alone. But these defensive victories were merely buying time for what German planners hoped would be their decisive counterstroke. That July, the Germans launched Operation Citadel, hurling nearly 1,000 Panzer IVs at the Soviet defenses around Kursk, the largest concentration of armor in history. The 16th Panzer Battalion entered the battle with just 11 Panzer IVs, alongside 37 outdated Panzer IIIs. Over the following months of desperate combat, these few tanks would claim more than 230 Soviet vehicles destroyed, paying with 7 of their precious Panzer IVs in the process. Each loss was a dire blow to the Wehrmacht, as German factories struggled to keep pace with the seemingly infinite Soviet production. Meanwhile, as the Allies invaded Sicily in July, the handful of Panzer IVs and the crews tasked with defending the island discovered a new threat: naval guns that could obliterate a tank from miles offshore. Though German crews fought savagely, destroying Allied armor at favorable ratios, Sicily fell within weeks, costing the Germans 52 precious Panzer IVs. By late 1943, German units were so short of armor that they pressed obsolete short-barreled Panzer IVs from 1941 back into service alongside the latest models. The Panzer IV itself had become an excellent tank, but by then, Germany was losing the war, not for lack of quality, but because it could not match Allied numbers and resources. By 1944, Germany was hemorrhaging, and the final variant of the Panzer IV, the version J, revealed just how desperate things had become.